God of War Ragnarok. There is a lot to say about this game because it is a massive game with a lot of unique elements working in tandem. It's a game where every ounce of effort is on display, and I could continue to talk about it for hours. And I want to continue to share the love, but I also think there are some things I would have done differently. So why not categorize it with the 10 best and 10 worst things about God of War Ragnarok? Admittedly, I am going to be reaching for some of these, so bear with me. Originally, it was only going to be 5 best and 5 worst, but I found it hard to keep the list down because there's a lot to talk about with this game, as I said. Fair warning though, last time we were going minimum spoilers, this time it's full spoilers, so if you haven't yet and have any intention of playing this game, now's your chance to back out. Don't say I didn't warn you. They gone? Alright, let's get it on. Also, this is just my opinion, don't get too hung up on it. So, a runner-up apiece because they kinda cancel each other out. The bar fight would have been the 10th best had it not been for what would have been the 10th worst, that being Thor. If you would have asked me what I think a God of War game needs, a hilarious bar fight wouldn't be on the list, but I'm glad it was because it was probably the best bar fight in the history of gaming. But it's also begotten by Thor, who wasn't a bad character at all. Actually, I think he's a great character, but not quite what I wanted. Thor, I was hoping, would be a ruthless killer that would give Kratos a run for his money as maybe a penultimate boss fight, and while he was the latter, he wasn't the former. Instead, they kind of subvert your expectations and make him into a fat, depressed drunk who's constantly belittled by Odin and has family issues up the wazoo. And it works. You get to see Thor in a really sympathetic light. He's this ultra-powerful god who just doesn't give a damn anymore. I'm not going to complain that he's not MCU Thor, but I do kind of wish we could have seen a little bit more cold-blooded killer Thor. He's a great character, maybe just slightly different than what I would have wanted. I would have liked a little bit more Infinity War, a little bit less Endgame, if you see what I mean. So they cancel each other out. Moving on. So this is a personal choice. The intro where Atreus' wolf Fenrir dies in his arms made me genuinely misty-eyed, but I know a thing or two about Norse mythology, so I knew the name Fenrir was not a coincidence. So when Atreus and Kratos have to fight the Great Wolf Garm in Helheim, and Atreus essentially stabs Garm with the knife infused with Fenrir's soul, seeing Atreus reunite with Fenrir in the body of Garm was one of the sweetest moments in the game and a genuine tear-jerking payoff. Also, giant Fenrir is adorable. Now, don't get me wrong, Atreus' gameplay is fine. It's okay. It's good in short bursts. But I don't think it ever evolves significantly enough to the point where I enjoy it anywhere near as much as I do when I'm playing as Kratos. And there are quite a few sections where you have to play as Atreus. You do eventually gain some new abilities and whatnot, but your moment-to-moment gameplay changes very little. Usually Atreus' sections are bolstered by the story, which kept me hooked most of the time. Most. And when they're on the shorter side, they don't overstay their welcome, but on occasion they do overstay their welcome, and at that point it becomes really glaring just how shallow Atreus' gameplay is compared to Kratos'. I feel as though there's some misconceptions about how to make a quality soundtrack in a video game. To me, a soundtrack is more than just notes being played. To me, a soundtrack has to enhance the scenes that they're part of. Just playing good music while something completely unrelated or something completely tonally different is happening on screen isn't a bad thing, but that's not necessarily a good soundtrack to me. A good soundtrack to me is something that sounds good on its own, but also sells the emotions of the scenes that they're part of. That is what Bear McCreary really understood while making the soundtrack to God of War Ragnarok. A lot of these tracks sound great on their own, and Blood Upon the Snow is an instant classic, but man, when they're inserted into these scenes and have the necessary context, it adds so much weight and emotion to the drama. The Ragnarok piece hitting its crescendo right as they enter the portal.
Ready yourselves.
The entirety of Rabe's lament. And of course, the boss themes need no context.
I'm on it!
Admittedly, the whole orchestral thing is overdone, but that's not a fault of God of War's soundtrack. If anything, orchestral soundtracks are overdone because, well, they work. So what some might call a generic film score, I call an immaculate soundtrack that knows exactly what it wants to do and knows exactly what it wants to be and succeeds wholeheartedly. No Athena. Granted, this game was already massive, so having Athena make another appearance in this game might have been overkill, but it still does feel kinda disappointing that Athena made a short appearance in the previous game but is now nowhere to be seen. And we know she's definitely still around. She was definitely real in God of War 3, so she's definitely still real now. So other than the fan theory that she was the one who gave Odin the mask, her influence on this game is disappointingly non-existent. But that's not a complaint about what this game is, rather a complaint about what it isn't, so it doesn't really take anything away from the overall quality of the game. Okay, so I played this game in performance mode because I'm one of those weird subhumans who prefer 60 FPS over ray tracing, but even with that, this game is absolutely gorgeous. When we first got to go to Brock and Sindri's house, I couldn't help but just look around, it was so beautiful. And I had multiple instances where I did that, including Asgard, which truly does feel like a beautiful Nordic summer. The spark of the world in Muspelheim was stunning, Vanaheim is immaculate. This game is just filled with amazing art direction and feels like a game where every ounce of effort is truly on display, and it absolutely shows. Truly a game worth it just for the sightseeing alone. Okay, so the section in Vanaheim with Freya breaking her curse, holding her to Midgard is great. One of my favorites in the game. There's superb character work, great storytelling, naturally occurring fan service that's rewarding for longtime fans, and it's great from a gameplay perspective, and it's all capped off by a fantastic boss fight that felt straight out of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. But there is a bit of a caveat. I don't think Freya forgiving Kratos is out of the question, especially considering they have a common enemy, but considering she basically promised to drag his lifeless carcass throughout all the 9 realms at the end of the last game, and the fact that she spent the last couple years brutally attacking Kratos at every opportunity, I feel like her learning to coexist with Kratos should have been more of a process. I put it this high up on the list because the plot itself leads to some great storytelling, and it's not that unbelievable, just a little undercooked. Like, maybe leave it in the oven for another 5 minutes and it would have been perfect. The first Dad of Boy was definitely a story specifically surrounding Kratos and Atreus, with Baldur as the primary secondary character and antagonist. Beyond that, the side characters didn't get much. Freya was good but only appeared a handful of times, and the same goes for Magni and Modi. Brock and Sindri weren't involved in the plot to a major degree, and of course there's Mimir, but that's pretty much as far as the side characters go. Not a lot going on. But in God of War Ragnarok, the side characters get fleshed out ridiculously well. Thor gets his own story arc, and I never thought I'd feel bad for a guy who tried to kill me in the first hour of the game. His daughter Thrud also has a lot to chew on. Freya has a lot of fleshing out as a character. There's some good character work with Freyr. Heimdall fantastically establishes himself as the one you love to hate. But the cream of the crop for me, Brock and Sindri have major involvement in the story. With Sindri being a pseudo-mentor for Atreus, and it also being revealed that Brock is technically dead, which creates a lot of compelling drama. We stay at their house when Midgard is no longer safe, and both of them come on various adventures for various plot-relevant reasons. There is so much going on with these two, which is weaved throughout the entire narrative of the game. I didn't expect to get misty-eyed for Sindri, but I'll admit to having a lump in my throat during the scene after Brock's death. Even Atreus' friend in Asgard gets a bit of a spotlight, and I don't even remember his name off the top of my head. This game is just so story-rich with all the fleshing out of the side characters. Although talking about side characters who didn't get any development, I'm not gonna lie, I played through the entire game and I could not tell you what this guy's name is. He's a lieutenant of Freyr who has a big sword, and that's all I'm prepared to say. He's not a noteworthy character whatsoever, and I don't even think he spoke in a non-optional cutscene before this point. So during the rescue of Freyr, when he started dramatically walking up Skidblanir, or is that pronounced Skeedblanir? I don't f***ing know, Nordic names are weird. Well, anyway, when he dramatically walks up Freyr's boat, chanting to himself as if he's some important character before launching himself into the air for a heroic sacrifice, I couldn't help but laugh because I don't know who he is, so their attempts to make me feel bad for this nothing character fell on deaf ears. When I first jotted down a list of things I thought was going to happen in God of War Ragnarok, one of them was I thought Tyr was going to betray you. But despite not wanting to fight, he spends the entire game seemingly on the level, until you get the Mask of Infinite Knowledge or whatever weird name they give it, and he starts acting suspiciously and Brock susses him out. Then, suddenly, stab, it's actually Odin in disguise. That genuinely caught me off guard, but it's one of those things where you can go back and look at all the subtle hints throughout the story, analyze it, and you realize that it makes perfect sense. Genius storytelling, a fantastic twist, and if you want to tell me it was predictable, you're full of it. So yeah, the menus are a bit difficult to navigate, and the map screen's not very well designed, and makes it a bit hard to find things in the world. The game gets a couple notches worse every time I have to hit the pause button. I speak no hyperbole when I say this might actually be my favorite video game intro of all time, and I felt that way from the moment it was over. It starts off already balls to the wall with Freya trying to kill us, then there's the raiders making it inside the safe haven that Atreus and Kratos have built, fighting a giant bear which turns out to be Atreus, which freaked the hell out of me because I thought they were about to kill the kid. Then the big reveal of Thor and Odin, the boss fight with Thor, and potentially my overall favorite moment in the entire game. Thor kills you in a scripted moment during the boss fight, but Thor decides, nah, we ain't done yet, and revives you straight out of the game over screen. It's not the first time that this has been done, but when you establish a game mechanic like that and hold true to it for that long, only to subvert it out of the blue, it's never not going to be shocking. The game has a pretty lengthy cooling off sequence after you get to Brock and Sindri's house, but that first hour and a half was balls to the wall, and it hooked me like a fish from the start. Now, this might stir some shit, but for as good as the game started, the final boss I found relatively underwhelming. The actual ending was great, but I found the final boss disappointed me for a few reasons. First of all, even up to the point immediately before Ragnarok, the actual event, they were still teasing the fact that this might have been Kratos' final battle. But as soon as Ragnarok started, I never felt that Kratos was ever in any actual danger of dying. They didn't tease it whatsoever. Second, the mysterious Mask of Infinite Knowledge that they spent half the game building up to amounted to nothing as Atreus snapped it in half and let it go into the void. And third, I'm gonna be honest, Odin never actually seemed like that big of a threat. He didn't come across as very powerful to the point that I was kind of waiting for him to unleash his Omega variant where he transforms into a giant monster or something, and I think to myself, holy crap, I'm gonna die. But after 2 phases, he goes out on somewhat of a whimper. Honestly, the Ragnarok monster seemed like more of a threat than him. The end result of which being I felt the game-ending conflict was a bit on the weaker side. But you know what boss fight they did a really good job with because they did a really good job at making me hate him? Heimdall. Dude was the dictionary definition of a son of a bitch. A friend of mine pointed out a parallel to Hermes from God of War 3, a cocky ass who refuses to leave well enough alone and got by on his pure speed. He spent the entire game antagonizing Atreus, Thrud, and Kratos, and was even prophesized to kill Atreus himself. He was a complete and utter dick with no redeeming qualities who was so perceptive that we couldn't even lay our hands on him, constantly laying in verbal abuse and condescending dismissive physical abuse, which only made us want to Hulk smash him all the more. So when we finally got to lay our hands on him, it's one of the most satisfying bosses I've ever experienced. Kratos makes him completely lose his cool under the pressure of someone landing a hit on him for the first time in generations, and from then on, it's all about breaking his spirit and his body. Then the surprise second phase after he refuses to leave well enough alone is the cherry on top. He refuses to admit defeat and refuses to give up his pursuit to kill Atreus because his pride won't let him. So Kratos has absolutely no choice. F*** this guy. He truly was the Dolores Umbridge of this game. There was a period of time in this game that I genuinely did not like Atreus. He was being suspicious, bratty, and unreasonable. He ends up causing a lot of conflict because he's so Helheim bent on finding out what it means to be Loki. When you have something like 6 reasonable people telling you not to do something and you still do it, that's not a recipe for a likable character. Oh yeah, he also turns into a bear and attacks Sindri. I did keep in mind the entire time that something similar happened in the first game where after Atreus finds out he's a god, he almost immediately becomes corrupted with power, only to be pulled back shortly after. So I was willing to go with them on this, and they definitely make it all worth it by the end of the Helheim chapter, but for a brief moment in time, I genuinely did not like Atreus. The combat in this game has been improved so much, between refining and smoothing out the combat that was already there, as well as adding several new combat abilities that can be seamlessly slotted into your combos, and also giving you a third weapon on top of that. Although introduced a little bit too late into the game, the combat is so much better in Ragnarok. I've seen some of the combos that people have been pulling off on social media, and the smoothness of which you can pull these off is light years ahead of what you were able to do in God of War 2018, which already had a great combat engine. Even different shields will give you different abilities to slot in and out of your combat arsenal. It's a very nuanced combat engine with a lot of elbow room for customization. This game manages to be fun and satisfying to play all the way through, even beyond its story elements. So if you were to ask me if there are any sections I would cut or reconfigure, the first thing that came to mind was the Norn section. Going through several false stops, fighting through hordes, fighting through mental trials, and finally traveling underwater only to find out that fate is a load of balls and we're only at the whims of how predictable we are. That felt like a giant waste of time for the most part. But then I remembered Alfheim, or rather I didn't remember it because off the top of my head I could not remember why we were in Alfheim at the beginning of the game, which is showing Tyr the true prophecy of Ragnarok. The part I remember more from that section was the side quest of freeing the injured animal and the adorable character work that results from it. All told, these sections are too long for what they offer the story and could have easily been shortened or cut altogether, with their major story elements being introduced in other ways, which also plays into the next worst thing about the game. Okay, so I'm just gonna come out and say it. There were at least 5 separate points in this game that had me welling up. But I have to admit, this game finally broke me. It actually made me cry. For a brief moment. It was Brock's funeral. But there is so much about this game that would bring emotion out of even the most stone-hearted longtime fan. Fenrir, as I mentioned, seeing Sindri lose everything, Kratos letting his guard down to Atreus in Helheim, Kratos telling a story to Atreus before the final battle, and Atreus' final goodbye to Kratos at the end, to name a few. Even something as simple as the moment where Atreus is Helheim knows where and Kratos is just sitting there alone with his thoughts was a genuinely powerful scene with absolutely no dialogue. This is a very emotional game, and I think it's the type of emotional that won't be divisive in the same way that The Last of Us 2 was emotional. I think any sane person can get on board with how feelsy this game is. It's too damn long. This is a game with a lot of plot, but the specific through line takes a while to present itself. The first game had the main antagonist, Baldur, and a main driving goal: get to the highest peak of Jotunheim to release Faye's ashes. A simple and straightforward goal to work towards, but with preventing Ragnarok being the primary focus here, there's no specific means to do that. Because the difference between having a goal to not do something and having a goal to do something is that having a goal to do something requires action. Inaction is something that's more difficult to pull off. So until the primary MacGuffin is introduced, the plot is compelling, but a little bit meandery. There's a lot of places to go, a lot of things to do, and a lot of people to meet. And at 24 hours just for the main plot, it's a commitment. I appreciate getting my money's worth, but I also wish that Sony's first-party exclusives would occasionally remember that some of us have jobs. Man, can I just say, as someone who's been with the series near enough since the beginning, seeing Kratos' continued character growth is so gratifying. As I predicted with the trailers, his arc is mostly based around the ever-present fear that he hasn't really changed, and that the ghost of Sparta is only just below the surface. So it's only a matter of time before he rears his ugly head. These behaviors show themselves whenever Atreus is not around to balance Kratos out, something he admits to. When he's forced to kill Heimdall, he has a moment where he feels history repeating itself and he becomes genuinely afraid for what he might do, leading to one of the better sequences in the game. In the end, he's asked to lead the charge on Asgard, so he must be a general, be the ghost of Sparta one more time. But it's there where he realizes that he must fight for justice, not vengeance, no matter what his history or the monster inside him says. They should open their hearts to the suffering of others, not close it. And they need to be better. Finally allowing the man and the monster to coexist. Friggin' chef's kiss. Then there's also the subplot about him coming to terms with the fact that he believes he's destined to die. What with the mural at the end of the last game. So he's been attempting to teach Atreus to survive on his own. But with that, he must also learn to let go and allow Atreus to exist as his own man. All of which comes to a head at the end of the game where Kratos survives Ragnarok, but Atreus decides that he wants to try and find the rest of the giants. So Kratos must allow his son to go off on his own for the first time, and they may never see each other again. Then this line honestly makes me choke up every single time.
Loki will go. Atreus remains.
It's the culmination of 2 games of storytelling finally allowing him to not only let go of Atreus, but of his misdeeds. his fear of not being able to do right by Atreus after his previous family. And there's even a payoff for what I thought was a throwaway line. Earlier in the game, it's made a point that Kratos may be a god, but he's never had anyone worship him, so when he finds the mural of himself being worshipped, it shows his character is coming full circle. The ghost of Sparta was a man feared by all who knew the name. But finally, Kratos finds himself in a position to be a hero, a god to be worshipped. The entire game feels like a culmination of Kratos as a character in a way that I never would have thought possible. This is the part of the game that I've already said multiple times is where it really started to lose me. This is where you're introduced to Angrboda, who is essentially Atreus' primary love interest, and depending on how cute you find their dynamic, it'll either be a lighthearted break from the action, or it'll be a slow-paced slog. To me, it was a 2-hour section where we slowly rode around on a yak, collected fruit, occasionally fought, and overall did a whole lot of nothing interesting. There is some story-relevant stuff here, but not enough to justify the runtime, and it's also not interesting enough to compensate for Atreus' gameplay not lending itself to a long runtime. It's just a dark blotch on an otherwise great game. I get what they were trying to do. They're trying to establish the relationship between Angrboda and Atreus, and because this was going to be their only chance to really hit it home, it needed to go on for a while, but going on for a while and absolutely dragging is not the same thing. There were a couple separate occasions where I was told that I could stick around unless I really needed to go, but near as I can tell, that wasn't really an option considering there were plot-relevant things we needed to do right up until the end. Basically, if I ever decide to replay this game, I'm going to absolutely dread this part, assuming I don't skip it altogether. And that was, to me, the 10 best and worst things about God of War Ragnarok. Admittedly, I was reaching for some of these, but that's just because I do love this game. Where does it rank among the entire God of War series? Helheim if I know. I'm not going to compare 2018 or Ragnarok to the other 6 games because, as I've said multiple times, they're incomparable, and I don't want to indignify either of them by forcing that comparison. God of War Ragnarok has sparked my imagination and reminded me of why I love this series, both the old and the new. It's not perfect, and certainly not for everyone as I've demonstrated today, but it's hard to hate a game, or even criticize a game that kept me as emotionally invested as this one did. It may have been working off my established investment, but that's what being a fan is for. If you like this video and want to support the channel, please consider pledging to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards like these folks here. And an extra special thank you to users FarmCat84, Inutsu, and GAW004 for going above and beyond. Elsewise than that, you can support the channel by liking, subscribing, leaving me a comment telling me what you think, and hitting the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. Let me know what you think is the best or worst part of this game in the comment section below. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Peace!